News on WCBS 880, right here, right now.
I believe if we can get in touch with him, we have a witness who saw what happened at the World Trade Center.
This apparently was a commuter plane that smashed into it with such force that the windows of the Pick-a-Bagel smashed with a big bang. Everybody was very frightened.
Did you manage to see what kind of plane it was?
No, I couldn't tell. It was a smaller plane. It looked like a smaller plane, but I couldn't tell. I'm not really sure.
A medium-sized body plane with engines on both sides. Almost like a gray-black color in nature on the plane.
I would say it wasn't a huge jet, but it was a plane that sounded like it was a fighter jet overhead.
I work right next door at 74 Trinity Place. We heard the first one come in. I didn't know what it was. It sounded like a missile.
Oh, my God, Ed, another plane just hit the World Trade Center. Another plane. It was a medium-sized plane. Unbelievable.
It would appear, Jim, as if there's more smoke coming from the ground.
And well, we used to have another, things have fallen to the ground and are burning. And we have...
One gentleman told me he was on the 65th floor standing next to an elevator when the elevator exploded and knocked him out of his shoes. Another woman said that she was working on the 49th floor and she's seen people in the stairwells with burns, broken arms. People are passing out of the stairwells from the heat. She says there's a lot of heat and smoke. It's a horrible scene here. I'm live at Broadway and Fulton. Allison Keyes, WCBS 880 News.
All right, thank you, Allison.
Basically, there's people running around down the street. All the glass panes that are on the bottom part of the World Trade Center are all blown out. When I first heard it and ran over to the window, it looked like there was fire on the bottom floor.
Well, they're ahead there. And all of this, the world...
Oh, wait. Oh, my God. Oh, my God, the building fell. Are you there? The building just fell.
You said it sounded like the 4th of July. You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the finale of the 4th of July over the East River.
Oh, my
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Right now, police have to determine is whether that explosion was caused from the initial impact of the plane or whether it was something that was exploded on the ground. Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself.
By that evening, eyewitnesses and experts alike were rushing to defend the official narrative of events, claiming that raging jet fuel fires melted the steel inside the Twin Towers.
I saw this plane come out of nowhere and just ream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
When one of those airplanes crashed into one of the towers, it was the equivalent of a 6-point earthquake.
Marlene Davis is the Dean of Architecture at the University of Tennessee. She calls the 110-story tall twin tower tube structures. That means there are no internal columns holding it up.
You know, when we saw this yesterday, people said, oh my goodness, there was a bomb on there. There must have been a bomb that collapsed.
Must have been a bomb below.
Right, that finished the job. Well, it turns out we heard from experts who said that, you know what, the fire on those floors probably 1,500 degrees. Steel can only withstand so much because the steel structure that holds the building up was on the outside, and essentially the building started to melt and it gave way and it toppled.
Engineers suspect the temperatures inside the crash areas could have quickly reached well over 1,000 degrees, perhaps approaching 2,000 degrees, beyond the melting point of any steel.
They were not designed perhaps to take a direct strike from something the size of a 737 or an Airbus, perhaps fully loaded with fuel. Steel will melt.
Physics professor and explosives expert Van Romero.
Even if there was no secondary explosives in the building, hitting the having the airplane hit the building where it did, a large amount of weight above the damaged location, that damaged location being further damaged by the fire, that structure could no longer support the weight above it, and the collapse ensues.
Numerous individuals, including some of the architects themselves, would claim that plane crashes were never taken into consideration and that the building was doomed to failure.
Hyman Brown was the project engineer on the Twin Towers, the man on the ground in charge of making sure the buildings were built right, the way it was designed.
Structural steel is fireproof to last between 1 and 2 hours, which it did, and then steel melts.
Each tower was built around a central core. That core kept the building up, supporting the tower's so-called dead weight. But when steel melts, according to Brown, like dominoes, it falls. Brown says the towers were built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour hurricanes, the 100-year storm, the worst nature could dish out. But he says an airplane crash never entered anyone's mind.
However, that's not entirely true.
Yet the impact of the planes alone did not cause that failure. In fact, tall building designers try to anticipate air accidents. Marc Loiseau is president of a company called Controlled Demolition.
When this structure was designed, it was designed, to the best of my understanding, to take the impact of what was then the state-of-the-art airplane being used in our country, the Boeing 707.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting.
John Skilling, the World Trade Center's head structural engineer, told the Seattle Times after the 1993 bombing that if a plane struck the building, there would be a horrendous fire, but the building structure would still be there. On August 21, 2002, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, commenced their investigation. NIST is a government agency that reports back to the United States Department of Commerce, headed at that point by Donald Evans and later replaced by Carlos Gutierrez, both Bush cabinet appointees. As part of their investigation, NIST contracted Underwriters Laboratories to recreate floor models from the Twin Towers for the purpose of fire resistance tests.
We heard about it in the news. We heard about it right away that the floors didn't collapse. Okay, so they tested these huge models. They're models, but they're huge. I mean, one model was essentially the same size and exactly the same as one of the types of floor sections used. And they tested it according to ASTM E119. It exposed it to much longer fire and higher temperatures than we know were present in the World Trade Center. So right away there was a problem. And that's August of 2004.
The final report was released on October 26, 2005, producing over 10,000 pages. It will not explain the actual collapse of the buildings. They only claim to get to collapse initiation and state flatly that it led to global collapse. The report, admittedly, does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for initiation were reached and collapse became inevitable.
We were charged with finding out the cause of the collapse, and we found what happened. I think we've scientifically demonstrated what was required to initiate the collapse. Once the collapse initiated, the video evidence is rather clear. It was not stopped by the floors below, so there was no calculation that we did to demonstrate that, what is clear from the videos.
NIST concludes that they found no evidence suggesting that the World Trade Center towers were brought down by controlled demolition. Where would people get an idea like that? 1. Except for material that was blown outwards, the Twin Towers collapsed into their own footprint symmetrically at nearly free-fall speeds. Newton's laws of motion determine how long it takes an object to travel a certain distance in complete freefall. In a controlled environment, an object dropped from the roof of either twin tower would reach the ground in 9.2 seconds. The 9/11 Commission report will state, At 9:58, the South Tower collapsed in 10 seconds. Even NIST says the tops of the buildings came down essentially in free fall. Judge for yourself.
And our conclusion is that the building should not have fallen that rapidly if indeed fire caused the collapse. And in fact, there's one mechanical engineer, Gordon Ross, in the Journal of 911 Studies, who's done a thorough analysis based on conservation momentum.
If the official story was correct, then the heating that was supposed to cause the failure would have been a much slower event, and it would have been an asymmetric event. For the tower to collapse straight down onto itself flies in the face of what we know about steel and how steel behaves. When we have a failure in one area, then the failures tend to continue within that area, and you see an asymmetric collapse, possibly the upper section falling off as it twisting away from the tower and falling off. But it's very unusual to see the upper section falling straight through the path of the greatest resistance, which was straight down through the middle of the tower. It just does not add up.
2. Molten metal exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit was discovered in the rubble of Ground Zero, underneath the Twin Towers and Building 7. Even with heavy rain on September 14th and 21st, a constant stream of fire retardants and water, described as creating a giant lake, these fires would not be extinguished until December 13th, 2001, making it the longest burning structural fire in history. Was the jet fuel responsible? Dr. Frank Gale, who was working with NIST, claimed in 2005. Your gut reaction would be that the jet fuel melted the steel. Indeed it did not. The steel did not melt.
The temperatures that we know existed within the collapse, within the debris pile, are physically impossible from an atmospheric jet fuel fire. Cannot be done.
I'm curious about the pool of molten steel that was found in the bottom of the towers.
I am too.
And
just tell me about it. Have you seen it?
Well, not personally, but eyewitnesses there found huge pools of molten steel beneath the towers, and some scientists don't think that the collapse of the building could have melted all that steel.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, and no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it. I was on the site, I was on the steel yards, so I don't know that that's so.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava from a volcano.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of the wall from Building 6.
However, they do hit hot spots occasionally, and everything stops.
There were fires of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit below the ground.
I don't know that that's so.
There's video of it.
Melted around 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it's probably pretty difficult to get that kind of temperatures in fire.
Well, NASA pictures thermal